Does someone have
Just
the
before the
text?
end of the story, or well, maybe I should leave this to the end, but let me just start with this. There's different ways that Jews take the story from the way Christians take the story, at least from Israel, depending on where you are. Esau is going to be toward the end. I think the story in the Bible, he's not the most favored, he's not the most wicked person either. But by the time you get into the later period, Esau becomes the personification of evil in opposition to Israel. And even though he can't be identified anymore, the Jewish rabbinic tradition identifies Esau with the Christian church, who was the enemy of the Jews throughout the ages. That these were the sons of Esau on this. And then one of my rabbis in Israel was talking to some Christians. He said, well, they said, we don't see the story that way. But it's all kinds of sayings in rabbinical literature that way. So I don't know if that's right or wrong, but we'll see if we can figure it out somewhere along the way. Just a little prolegomena there.
Here's Dale. Hi, Dale. You're just looking at the Genesis text.
Right.
Okay.
People like to
text in front of them.
People like to demonize various people to help explain the world to them, and that of all religions, and that's a common tool of all of them, and that, and it's needed to sometimes to a certain extent, but I think as in general it needs to be critiqued when it's used. But we'll see if we can get that then. Okay, I'll let y'all talk now.
Okay. Okay. I don't have it right in front of me, but
I have it.
Okay.
Oh, go ahead, Billy.
Go ahead, Billy.
This is the story of Isaac, son of Abraham. Abraham begot Isaac. Isaac was 40 years old when he took to wife Rebekah, daughter of Bethuel, the Aramean of Padan Aram, sister of Laban, the Aramean. Isaac pleaded with the Lord on behalf of his wife because she was barren, and he responded to his plea, and his wife Rebekah conceived. But the children struggled in her womb, and she said, if so, why do I exist? She went to inquire of the Lord, and he answered her, 2 nations are in your womb, 2 separate people shall issue from your body. One people shall be mightier than the other, and the older shall serve the younger. When her time to give birth was at hand, there were twins in her womb. The first one emerged red like a hairy mantle all over, so they named him Esau. Then his brother emerged, holding on to the heel of Esau, so they named him Jacob. Isaac was 60 years old when they were born. When the boys grew up, Esau was a skillful hunter, a man of the outdoors, but Jacob became a mild man, raising livestock. Isaac favored Esau because he had a taste for game, but Rebekah favored Jacob. Once, when Jacob was cooking a stew, Esau came in from the open, famished. And Esau said to Jacob, give me, did I go too far?
No,
I
don't think so.
Oh, okay, we got a little more to go. Give me some of that red stuff to gulp down, for I am famished, which is why he was named Edom. Jacob said, first sell me your birthright. And Esau said, I am at the point of death, so of what use is my birthright to me? But Jacob said, swear to me first. So he swore to him and sold his birthright to Jacob. Jacob then gave Esau bread and lentil stew. He ate and drank, and he rose and went away. Thus did Esau spurn the birthright.
All right. Thank you, Billy. Were you reading that from Sepharia? Just curious.
Yes.
Yeah, the wording is exact. Yeah. Oh. Okay.
The word that begins that I think, did you say what was story was the first word in verse 19?
Verse 19.
Mine says this is the story. That's the JPS.
I wouldn't say that's a good translation. It's not a literal translation. Let's look at the literal. Maybe it's okay, but that it is true. But let's look at the literal translation. The literal translation is much more explicit. Toledot. And the word Toledo in Spain comes from that. Toledot is a good Hebrew word. It means births or generations.
Yeah.
So all of Genesis is a book of generations of this. And so here are the generations of Isaac. We've had Abraham and his before, we're gonna have some afterwards. And that's so these are the generations, the births for the word yalad, to give birth to. But toledot is a sort of noun form. These are the births of Isaac here. Generations is how my old JPS translates it. And how did it translate Jacob? It said that he's, what did it say? The contrast between them. Esau was man of the field, and Jacob was, that's a crucial word for understanding Jacob.
Livestock, I think.
Yeah. It says the Hebrew, Ish Tam Yosef Halim. He was a Tam, which in Hebrew means, it means several things. It's, how did they translate that? Ish Tam Yosef Halim.
Mine says a mild man.
Again, I would, there's more to that word than that.
A mild man who stayed in camp is the translation of that, am I?
Yeah, is that
I would
JPS, Judy?
I take the little that each time I leave Tom undefined until I explain what it means in other places. And Ohalim are tents. He was a tent dweller. But the longer that is, here's a guy who's satisfied with what he has there. He doesn't have to go out in the world and do things in that. And if rabbinical tradition, he becomes a scholar and reads his holy books, things like that, everything. I want to believe that stuff. But Tom, it's one of the characters on Passover of the four sons. There's the wise son, the wicked son, and the one that doesn't know. And the third son is called the Tom. And it's translate the simple son, but Tom can also mean, it means simple, but it also means complete in the simplicity. It's not a negative term at all necessarily. It's not a highly praiseworthy term, but it's not a negative term. Each Tom is somebody who is complete. And so Jacob is somehow complete, even though he doesn't go out and conquer the world and doesn't kill animals and prevail over things of this. So that's, I think, important to get you. I'm doing that just because I think it's important to catch those words. I think that's the key to this. That verse is the key to the story, is my opinion.
That's startling because I've always thought of Jacob as the trickster, but you're right, Tom. I'm just looking at the definition. It says morally innocent, having integrity. One who is morally exactly.
That's right.
Yeah.
That wouldn't exclude what you just said, though. You can. It doesn't mean he's a simple. It doesn't mean he's a naive person. Doesn't mean he's a dope and taken advantage of by somebody. He could be Tom, but you can also go if you know somebody's coming after you, you can preempt them and go after them first. And so that's not inconsistent with being a Tom, with being a whole complete person, simple, straightforward person. Yeah, not inconsistent necessarily.
Because what's interesting about this, although Jacob tricks Isaac, it's Rebecca who's the manipulative person behind all this. She's changed a lot. Last time we were reading about it, she's this innocent young 16-year-old girl. Now
just kind of traveling along with him. Now all of a sudden she's the boss.
Manipulating.
She's kind of running the whole show here. Well, don't all the women in Genesis do that?
I don't know.
It says back when we had Abraham and Ishmael a few weeks ago. God said to Abraham, I try not to tell my wife this because she'll tell it to me. He says, "Shema b'kol, listen to her voice. Listen to what your wife says. Don't do it yourself. There, listen to her what she says."
When they send the young lad out into the desert. Yeah.
These are highly complicated stories. There's no all the various modern sort of things about sexist stereotypes, things that those don't apply at all. These stories are sui generis in themselves, and the roles there are male and feminine roles, but who is in power over that's totally undetermined in these stories. The stories are unique in their own character as far as I'm concerned, and so the typical stereotypes are not correct in interpreting them. I think you have to look at each one on its own accord in that. And then Robert Alter is good at going through these stories.
Yeah.
So being a hunter is never something good in
No.
Jewish tradition.
Right. It's like Cain and Abel, isn't it? Because Cain represents Canaan.
That, and then
Oh, is that right?
Ishmael went out, was kind of a man of the arrow and that. And then it said Nimrod, back in the generations of Noah, Nimrod was a mighty warrior, also kind of went out of this. So, and technically, according to Jewish law, a Jew is not supposed to be a hunter and a killer of animals. They can shecht an animal, they can kill an animal ritually, one of the kosher animals, by very proper procedures, very complicated, well-defined procedures. They can do that for the purposes of eating meat. But other than that, and those are only about 7 animals there about. Other than that, they're supposed to leave the rest of the animal kingdom alone. And they're not supposed to kill them, they're not supposed to hunt them or do anything with it. That's just kind of a basic sort of thing. And so that's kind of through Jewish culture and this and everything. And there's absolutely no one I know of. We haven't all been perfect. We've had some Jewish scoundrels and swindlers and things like that, but we've never had anybody go off and do things like that. We've never had any game hunters in Judaism, or people going off and trophies in their hallway or something like that. And as some parts of the world do and everything. But yeah.
Yeah.
Wouldn't play in Texas, would it, Billy?
The image of the 2 boys in the womb.
Do you have guns around your place there? Are you?
No.
But everybody else does, don't they?
Yeah, the image of the 2 boys in the womb, I think, was used in Calvinism to depict the good and evil in the church. You can't see which is which until the birth or the end of days, I guess.
See, when you get things like that, this becomes kind of a Manichaeanism. When you get, if the other side is utterly unredeemable, and you can have opposition, you can have pro and cons in that, but where you get something that becomes an eternal enemy or eternal adversary, that's problematic. But all religions get into that. They dip into it at times, maybe for personal, conveniences and that. Then, but anyway.
Right.
Not the best chapter of religion.
Yeah, but but again, it's the differences that here these are twins, right? And they're
Yes.
brothers. Yet the story
yeah.
just makes so many notations of their differences.
Yeah, usually you think of twins as being, they're obviously not identical twins, are they? So
No, but just that they're different characters, and so that there's a potential for division and for enmity, right from the very beginning when they're smashing together Rebecca's womb, even, right?
But you would think that it's because they're twins, they might have something in common. They might have some brotherhood together, but it turns out to be the exactly opposite of what you intend to think. Then is that right?
Yeah, well, it's the whole scandal of it. It's just it's just like Cain and Abel all over again. In some respects, where the there's we see it again with Jacob's with his sons, right, with the and how they treat Joseph. So there's just and it's to me it's just amazing that God's promises still manage to find a way forward through this, right? And it's to me, it's another story that just points to divine agency in the midst of human behavior, I guess, or every attempt amongst humans to prevent God from being made known. Yeah.
I think one of the differences between the Cain and Abel and Jacob and Esau story is in the Jacob and Esau story, Rebecca grooms Jacob to be a deceiver. We don't see that in Cain and Abel, or at least not explicitly. And, things would have played out even if Rebecca hadn't, plotted all this stuff against Esau.
Yeah, I don't know, because there's
So
definitely a difference there between them, right from the beginning. The differences are,
yeah, there's a difference, but that doesn't mean that they had to be enemies, right?
So Judy, are you saying that Jacob should have spoken up against his mother? He said, Mom, what are you doing here? It's not right to do this. Should Jacob have spoken up at the time? Said, hey, let me do this to the natural.
Well,
yeah.
Either Jacob should have spoken up, or Isaac should have stepped in and said, Rebecca, what are you doing?
He was not able
splitting
to.
my son.
He didn't know what was going on because he was blind.
Well, I don't know. Most people in a household know something that's going on.
Well,
But to me, the big difference here is Rebecca, right? Like I'm not sure who said it. Rebecca went. It was David. Rebecca went from this innocent, wonderful person to plotting to deceive everybody in the family, right? And pulling Jacob to her in that deception. I don't know.
Keep this in mind.
I'm not sure where I'm going with that, but to me, that's important.
Keep this in mind,
Rebecca
Judy.
is involved.
I don't think, to my knowledge, in the Bible or even in Midrash, all kinds of things, I don't believe Rebecca is condemned by any Jewish opinion. She's not necessarily highly praised for it. She's not put on a pedestal of honor and glory, I think, but she's not condemned either. Yeah. She was kind of performing. They had this country western song, making the best of a bad situation. She was doing what she had to do, and the whole thing could not go on with somebody like Esau carrying on the firstborn and the birthright and the blessing, all that kind of thing. It just couldn't go on that way, and so she was doing the best in a bad situation to make things right. And to my knowledge, she is not condemned. She's not so, how dare this woman adopt a wily attitude to that. That's not so. She's not praised either. It's not, oh, thank God Rebecca. No, it's just sort of a kind of a necessary, neutral step that she was doing to hasten things along.
Yeah, so, it's not like Laban's household that she grew up in was on the up and up.
No, that's right.
Right.
So she knew. Yeah, that's why that thing last week about her being the innocent girl, that was not true. That's what I said last week.
No, she was opportunistic. Yeah.
She saw all these people. She knew how they operated, and she knew all the tricks of the thing. So she didn't have to be taught any lessons or anything like that. She was well equipped. Ordinarily, times she would go about and be the girl at the well, or finding Isaac in the field, or doing things of this around the household, wherever it was. But when it came to it, she could be up to pulling a fast one and getting things done. So,
yeah.
Yep.
It's interesting because when the servant says to her, "Will you give me some water?" she says, I'll water your camels as well. Like it's an opportunity for her to move forward. Yeah.
I mean, and whose failure is it really that Esau doesn't value his birthright, like that he treated it in such a way that he was just willing to trade it? I mean, ended up being a pretty expensive bowl of soup, right?
But anybody who has siblings has done the same thing in different things, right? Like you say this hyperbolic sentence and you really don't mean it. Did Esau really mean it? Did Esau understand what he was saying?
Yeah.
To Jacob. and Jake, like I say, Rebecca groomed Jacob, right?
Yeah.
But I mean, I have 4 siblings. We've all said things to each other that we really don't mean what we said, or we don't really understand the consequences of what we said. And Esau is made out to be, in so many commentaries, is made out to be the bad person, right? The not worthy person, the person who has no wisdom.
Yeah.
And this is a sibling spat, right? And it ends up having consequences for thousands of years.
And this is it, right? That's the funny thing about this story, right? Is that is that Esau's the guy who has this happen to him, and he's really kind of not aware. Just in how the text, it says like he ate, drank, stood up, and went away, right? Just that's what he did, but a lot happened in that uh,
But it's also
verse.
interesting because it says in verse 29 that Esau was famished. I'm curious about the word famished. I'm not sure which word that is, but it's like I have a bit of an understanding. Well, sometimes I don't know whether it's my blood sugar or something. I'll be at the supermarket and it's just like I have to eat something, and it's like nothing's gonna stop me from having I have to have something. And so I think he
The word in
literally
Hebrew is
physically.
ayef.
Sorry,
Same word in modern Hebrew, tired, worn out.
which word is it?
Ayef, it's the last word. Ayef.
Yes,
Same word in
ayef.
modern.
Yes, faint,
Tired,
exhausted,
worn
weary.
out.
Yeah. So it's
Well,
like
there, I mean,
a
there
physical
is that
thing.
that 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 angle of instant gratification, right? With the text,
Yeah.
Okay.
right? That the short-term thinking. I mean, is Esau the short-term thinker and Jacob the long-term thinker? I mean, I don't know.
I think
There's
he
something like
is.
that,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah. There's
But
a really good
there's
movie
another
that
problem.
epitomizes this story. It's called Legends of the Fall, and it's actually the story of three brothers in I think they're in Montana. It's absolutely brilliant, but they all act according to their nature. And one of them is very much like an Esau type figure, but there's reconciliation at the end, just as there is in this story as well.
But we're sort of missing, we're all saying some very good things, but there's an elephant in the room we're not quite seeing. Why is it that Isaac loves Esau? How come? And the corollary to that question is a secondary question is why are it seemed like that we left Isaac and Rebecca so much together and everything, since the love mare, the field, all this, brought her to their tent and all that stuff. But then all of a sudden there's this great gap between them and there's a parental disunity. And why is that the case? But especially, why does why does Isaac love Esau? It gets
Yeah.
because he makes a good feel for it. And that is there something wrong with Isaac here? Just likes to doesn't he see the character of this guy? Doesn't he have any moral judgment or anything? I haven't answered that, but I want to see what you think before I give you a rabbinical answer to it.
But
What's going on there? I think that's a crucial question. I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, Karen, go ahead.
Rabbi Ellis, I think earlier you said that Rebecca was neutral, but maybe she wasn't. Is it possible that she was doing the will of God, like some of the other women in this in Genesis? They saw more, and they knew the path.
Yes, that's correct. But it's not. If you're doing the will of God, you don't need emblems and banners and flags and like that. Then and you just simply do it, and the doing itself testifies. That's what I would say.
Yeah.
I think Pirkei Avot says something like that too. No, yeah.
Sometimes parents have favorites. I mean, Rebecca's favorite is Jacob, and Isaac's favorite is Esau, and there's no rational explanation. I think it's the same in Legends of the Fall. The father, I can't remember his name now, but he loves Tristan, who's the Esau figure. He just loves him, even though he's a troublemaker. Just can't help it. He just loves him.
Really, doesn't the story play in all kinds of literature in that?
Oh yeah.
Our things are based upon the story of there. Somebody like Faulkner would use a story like this because he knew the Bible very well, didn't he?
Yeah. And you got John Steinbeck's East of Eden, which is
okay.
the Battle of Two Brothers.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
Good point, Kathy. Yeah, that the parent sees themselves in the favored child, right? Like because Isaac would have been a herdsman, and maybe Esau showed forth that potential in his early adolescence out there hunting around the animals, whereas Rebecca, she was the younger sister, and Jacob's the youngest, and here he is at home. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
The rabbinical way they let Isaac off the hook, the question I just said is, they said Isaac knew very well that his son was not on the highest level. but he was trying to come close to his son and try to improve him. You're not going to just dismiss him out there. You're not going to just disprove. He was trying to show a little bit of favor to him and then try to gradually bring him along. And that's what some people say. So I don't know if that makes sense or not, but
Yeah. It's interesting with Jacob as well. I'm looking at Alter here. It says he's a simple man, Tam, which is integrity, innocence, etc. But his name, Achab, means the heart can be crooked, which is the root of his. So he's both.
that's correct.
Yeah.
Achab can mean it's the heel, so it's the heel is at the crook of the foot there. So
Yeah.
like that. Yeah.
Cool. All right. Anything else on Genesis?
Well, this story you could go into for all kinds of things.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
But the sibling rivalry is always there, right? It's just, it comes up time and again. And how God uses, unlikely people.
Mhm.
Use or works through in some of the strangest circumstances, which should really cause us to pause when we seek to cast judgment. Because that's one of the things this story does, doesn't it? It invites us to judge these characters,
Yeah.
Yeah,
each and every one of them,
But it
right,
shows
as
it's
being
not simple to
good or
judge.
bad or this, just like their parents did. But at the end of the day, God has something else to say through their lives and through what transpires.
right.
Is there
And I think
sibling
every
rivalry?
person can,
Oh, go ahead,
I
Judy.
was just going to say, I think every person can see each of these characters in themselves at some point, right? Like, I think that's the whole point of reading,
if we're really
reading
listening,
these
yeah.
stories, right? Maybe not to some of the extremes, but certainly, when are you Esau? When are you Jacob? When are you Isaac? When are you Rebecca? We can all see ourselves in it.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
thinking outside the 5 books of the Bible, there's sibling rivalry elsewhere in the story of David and his family. There's things him and his brothers there between Ruth and Orpah in the book of Ruth.
yeah,
Mhm.
They're not rival, but they're very different characters in this, operating different ways in this. So it seems like all of the narrative parts of the Bible have things like this. But I was trying to think, is there any sibling rivalry in New Testament stories, or do they have things like that? Does everybody get along there?
Yeah, well, James and John,
James and John.
and they're talking about who's the greatest. Yeah, it's there. Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
Okay. And then there's
And
Mary.
Kathy said Mary and Martha.
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
Okay,
Mary,
okay.
Martha. Yeah, yeah.
And
Yeah,
I guess Jesus and his brothers, that when they didn't understand him, they went against him.
Oh, yes, yes. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. I wonder which one Jesus would be. Be the Jacob figure. Yeah, yeah. One commentary I
The
read.
favorite son.
Yeah. Yeah, one commentary I was reading said Esau might be someone like someone who takes rash actions, goes into a life of drugs, but then reforms, works it through, and turns out to be a good character, whereas the other one is the person who stays home, keeps his nose clean, but has his own issues to deal with because he can be manipulative.
Toward the end of the cycle in chapter 36 in Genesis, at the end of the cycle, there's going to be a whole list of Esau's descendants. It's called Edom. And Edom it's the kingdom to the south of the land of Israel. Actually, it's in modern Israel today, but in biblical times, it was not in the land of Israel. It was the kingdom where south of Beersheba, that area there. And there was a story in last week's reading in the Jewish tradition in the book of Numbers, chapter 21, 22, it was. Chapter 20, chapter 20 it was, that the children of Israel were traveling in the wilderness out of Egypt to go to the promised land. They were going around the east bank and coming in, and they wanted to pass through Edom's land as a shortcut. And they were going to go all the ways. And the king of Edom did not allow them to do that. So they had to circle around his land to do that. And they came with a hostile attitude. So there's already this thing there, and you see it in some of the prophets too. They make some of the prophets. Obadiah makes a whole thing about Edom, and so it gets this very demonic sort of thing taking place here. But anyway, that's the way biblical text works sometimes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, if we have a quick look at the Psalm 119. It's 105, 105 to, it's a short piece, to 112.
Psalm
This-
119. What
it's
verses?
Psalm 119, verses 105, because it's a really long Psalm, 105 to 112. Yeah.
Now, this psalm is deliberately crafted.
Yes, I've been reading
It's
about it. It's
alphabetical,
fascinating.
as some other psalms are, but this is was it an octave? It is 8 verses with Aleph, and 8 verses with Beit there, and so forth. So it's done in a series of 8s. To you get there, and 8 times 24 letters.
22,
alphabet is
right?
107. Well, yeah. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, it's really clever because like the first verse here, your word is a lamp to my feet, a light for my path. The first word in that verse is ner, which is actually I think wick or lamp. So literally your word is a lamp.
Light or candle, yes.
Light or candle, yeah. So that's kind of clever, yeah. So your word is a lamp to my feet, a light for my path. I have firmly sworn to keep your just rules. I am very much afflicted. O Lord, preserve me in accordance with your word. Accept, O Lord, my free will offering. Teach me your rules. Though my life is always in danger, I do not neglect your teaching. Though the wicked have set a trap for me, I have not strayed from your precepts. Your decrees are my eternal heritage. I am resolved to follow your laws to the utmost forever. I think that's the end of it. Yeah. Yeah. So I think the whole of Psalm 119 is basically about the Torah, isn't it, Rabbi Ellis?
Yeah. I've never studied it. I'm used to Psalms being very short and precise and finding things there. And some of the longer Psalms, and it gets repetitious. So I have never gone to this in detail, but it'd be worth going on to in detail this. But to me, some of the more profound Psalms are the very shorter ones. They just little, 8 verses sometimes, and you find stuff there. But I have to go through this. I've never studied this in real great detail, but I do have Rev Hirsch before me, so I'll see if I can find a highlight or two. But it's sort of a self-discipline. And
Yeah.
maybe it's the tendency that's going to lead to the ethics of the fathers later, something like that. Then you've got to see who you are. You have to be alert. You have to be on the ball. God is always before you. Don't think you can get away with things. Don't think you can avoid things here. You're going to face trouble and challenges, but that's not the end of it. To the contrary, that's where you have to start slugging harder and getting in there for this thing. And so it's a compendium of religious life here. You have to see this there. It's a good tradition that the places have to read these. It's interesting. I believe weren't the Psalms accepted right away into the Christian tradition, and weren't they continually throughout the ages? They never depart.
Jesus quoted the Psalms more than any other text in the Old Testament.
And the subsequent generations, the church fathers and the philosophers there, they did also. They were very much into this. Whereas some books of the Bible, they weren't necessarily into. So I taught a thing a few years ago in the book of Judges in the Bible. I was looking in the Hebrew, in the New Testament. I don't think the book of Judges is mentioned in the New Testament, to my knowledge. So they didn't read stuff like that necessarily, or Joshua, so maybe just passing on something happened. The Psalms, those were really taken up, and they became selected here and there and that thing. But the whole book became part of the Christian tradition. It was very integral part, Protestant and Catholic, as far as I know. Yeah.
Yeah, it kind of reminded me of what we were talking about last week with the practice of daily prayer and meditation. It says here the repetitions guide the hearing, the variations enchant the imagination. It establishes a focus of contemplation and evokes the mood of concentration and submission in which meditation occurs. And the other interesting thing, the imagery of the first verse, your word is a lamp to my feet. The lamp that they would have used then would have been a very small one with a small wick, and using it you could only see like a couple of feet in front of you. So it like you had to always have your lamp, and you go like 2 feet at a time, almost like in AA they say 1 day at a time. It's not
There's an
you
interesting
right into
there's an
the
interesting
future.
verse. There's an interesting verse that's similar to this in the book of Proverbs. It says, "Ner mitzvah Torah or." The mitzvah, the doing a good deed, a commandment, is a ner, it's a candle. The Torah, which is more inclusive, is or, it's light there. So it has a whole discussion in a part of the page of the Talmud. It says, "Ner mitzvah Torah or." A mitzvah is good, but doing a good deed is only a temporary sort of thing. It's only an incidental. It's very nice to do it. It's very commendable to do, but it's only a temporary thing. It doesn't fully get you there. You fully have light only by dedicating yourself fully to the tradition, the Torah, whatever, however you're going to take that to me. So ner mitzvah, a mitzvah is it's a candle. There, it'll lead you through the darkness. It'll help you through things now, but it's not going to help you in every situation there. But if you learn the Torah, that's a light. That's like the sunlight coming out. That shows you everywhere you go. They don't need a little candle hiding along the way there. That's the way that's. So this verse is somewhat similar to that.
Right.
And so I think there's something, that's an important verse, I think, to you can apply in both of our traditions. There's little things you can do. They're good, but you also have to have some kind of comprehensive sort of faith or sort of.
Okay. So that's Proverbs, is it?
It's in the book of Proverbs, yeah.
Okay. I'll look that
You
up.
know,
If you
I
want to
think-
look up, you can look up in the Talmud if you want to do it. It's a tractate called Sota, the woman's perspective adult. There's a tractate called Sota. It's page 21, I believe. I'm going to look it up there.
Yeah.
You can follow it in English. It's not easy. It's not difficult to follow. Yeah.
Sorry, Judy, what were you saying?
I was just going to say, you know, speaking about how the Psalms are important to both of our traditions. You know, the Psalms are so personal, right? It's my relationship with the divine, right? Like, yes, some of them go, you know, talk about Israel or the Hebrew people or whatever, but the majority of Psalms are very personal, right? Like here, you know, he's saying, God, your word is a lamp to my feet.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that's why they affect us so profoundly, right? Like we can each see ourselves in these Psalms, whether it's in times of despair or times of joy. But you know, he's not saying here, you know, Lord, preserve Israel. He's like, Lord, preserve me.
Me, yeah.
Judy, I would
Right.
I would disagree with that somewhat. It might say that, but Billy and I know about this from George Herbert Mead, and that there's a collective I that's talked about here. It might sound like an individual person, but it's not it's not an isolated individual. It's the whole community. It's personified as an individual. In other words, a genuine community itself has a personality like an individual, and that's important to have that there. So it might sound like it's just talking individual, but I don't think I'd have to look around.
But I guess I'd look at it that as each individual comes to worship the divine, then the community comes to worship the divine. But if the individual isn't on board, then it's not working in the community, right? I'm not saying
I think the Jewish approach is the opposite. I think the Jewish approach is the opposite. There's no individual without a community. The community perceives
lots of Jewish approaches, right? 2 Jews, 3 opinions.
Yes.
You know, I'm not saying that's incorrect, Rabbi Ellis, but I think both apply. I think this applies to both the individual and the community. And if the individual isn't on board, then you're just doing it out of obligation. You're not doing it out of worshiping God.
And I'm
Amen.
thinking of
Yeah.
something the German philosopher Leo Baeck said. He knew Christian scriptures very well. He knew the New Testament Greek and everything like that. Leo Baeck says, he says, there's nothing in the Hebrew tradition for the sorrows of an isolated individual, just the lone soul, lost soul. So there is no place for that. It's a sad situation, but there's no thing there. There's only if that person is just within some kind of communal context in that. An isolated individual by themselves off somewhere is not a Jewish datum of any sort. That's what Leo Baeck says. I think he's correct about that. There can be all kinds of individual things that happen to an individual person. His fate is always tied up with the pre-existing community which it holds himself into. Social self. Yeah.
I tend
Taking
to
the role of the other.
gravitate towards your view on it, Judy. Not that I think it's both. I remember when
I think it's both. Yeah.
In government, and we would run team sessions, and the process was deliberately set up in such a way that an individual perspective could transform the whole thing. Sometimes it's the one person who can actually transform the community. They become like in the gospel reading, the seed that
there's no question about that. I don't dispute that. That's the I and the me that Billy and I know about from George Herbert Mead. There's no question about that. That can happen. That's the creative self. But that creative self only occurs within a community. The community exists on a pre-reflective level, and your habits, there's things you have from being in that community, of birth, of gestures, just little things around it, the environment, smells, taste, and that. All that is part of your community there. Then out of that emerges the individual self, and you can be creative in that then, but the self does not exist outside of that social interactive situation.
Yeah. As my mother used to tell me when I'd get too big for my britches, she'd say, "Do you think that you just hatched on a rock somewhere?"
Okay. See, as I've told you all before, Billy and I were in a class many, many moons ago with a man who was a student of this philosopher sociologist, George Herbert Mead at the University of Chicago. It was David Miller's class, and Billy and I remember it very well. And it was a marvelous class. But when you read George Herbert Mead, his book still reads very well now. It's The Social Self. Have you ever read that, Dale, that book there?
No.
He was not particularly, I don't think he was particularly a religious person. But to me, his ideas just grew right into religion. They're just background for things of this thing. He was an agnostic or possibly even an atheist. But to me, he's talking about things that are all going through the Bible. The community, the self, the alienated self, the social self there. It's just, it's very well constructed, very well thought out.
Mind, Self, and Society is the name of that book.
Pardon?
Mind, Self, and Society is the main of it.
Mind, Self, and Society is his class.
Mind.
And he wrote none of it.
Yeah.
He wrote none of it.
That's right.
It came from his
several of his
verbatim
books.
notes.
Yeah. It's kind of like Aristotle's works. Aristotle's works were not written by him, or maybe only partly were. Most of Aristotle's works are notes of students there. George Herbert Mead is the same. He wrote some things, but they were mostly essays in periodicals in this. But his books that come out, Mind, Self, and Society, and The Philosophy of the Act, and Movements of Thought in the 19th Century, those are student notes that were compiled over the years. They're put together by his students. They were, apparently his lectures were just outstanding in this, but he never wrote it all down there. But his students decided that we got to have this stuff down in public there. So they put his books together. So.
Right.
Just speaking about self, I mean, sometimes it seems like you are the only one. You know, I mean, it can be weeks, months, or sometimes years before you find a community that you are a part of, or feel like you're a part of, and then you know, you may make some inroads or change that community in some way, but then it seems like you're off by yourself again. I tend to think or agree with Judy. It feels more that you're by yourself and looking for help with the Psalms or with any other readings, and then you may find a community, but it may be fleeting, and it just seems like you're more by yourself to me.
That can happen. I don't disagree with that. But what Mead is saying is that that self is there has only emerged by being within a community.
Right.
Of
You
having
only know
other-
your isolation by being a part of a community first.
That's how
Yes.
the self. There's no
Mhm.
self begins pure there. The self only comes about by a conversation of gestures, taking the role of the others, how others are interpreting you, how you're interpreting others. And that's the only way a self can emerge there.
Ah, there's a thought. Jesus is incarnate from the community as well as incarnate.
There you go. There you're getting
Yeah.
it there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Jesus Herbert Mead. That's where we got it.
I mean, that's why, when later on, when Jacob is on the ground with the stone for his pillow, he knows the only way he knows he's gotten to that point is because of what he no longer has and what had defined him, what he's fallen. Like, there's like a fallenness there.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I don't want to dispute what you all were saying. You were making some good points where you have the individuals in distress there, and that, but that itself proves what I'm saying there. They prove that because there's such a gap between where they came from. They came from this
No, exactly.
kind of social position, and there can be great alienation from that. There can be great estrangement from that, and it leads a person to isolation there. But that's a secondary sort of act that's taking place then. The first
I don't know if it's a secondary, but it's a consequence.
That's a good way to say it.
Yeah.
Better than I said. Yeah, no, I'll take that.
Yeah.
Okay. Romans or Matthew for next? We got about 10 minutes.
Which one, Romans or Matthew? Let's look at
Yeah.
Matthew briefly.
Yep. Okay.
That's Matthew 13, right?
Yes. Matthew 13, 1 to 9, 18 to 23.
I can read it.
Great.
Yeah.
Thanks, Judy.
Unless Dale, you want to read it.
No, go ahead, Judy. Yeah.
1 to 9. That same day, Jesus went out of the house and sat by the lake. Such large crowds gathered around him that he got into a boat and sat in it, while all the people stood on the shore. Then he told them many things in parables, saying, a farmer went out to sow his seed. As he was scattering the seed, some fell along the path, and the birds came and ate it up. Some fell on rocky places where it did not have much soil. It sprang up quickly because the soil was shallow. But when the sun came up, the plants were scorched, and they withered because they had no root. Other seeds fell among the thorns, which grew up and choked the plants. Still other seed fell on good soil, where it produced a crop, 100, 60, or 30 times what was sown. He who has ears, let him hear. Now 19 to 34. When anyone hears the message about the kingdom and does not understand it, the evil one comes and snatches away what was sown in his heart. This is the seed sown along the path. The one who received the seed that fell on rocky places is the person who hears the word and at once receives it with joy. But since it has no root, the person lasts only a short time. When trouble or persecution comes because of the word, they quickly fall away. The one who received the seed that fell among the thorns is the person who hears the word, but the worries of their life and the deceitfulness of wealth choke it, making it unfruitful. But the one who received the seed that fell on good soil is the person who hears the word and understands it. They produce a crop yielding 100, 60, or 30 times what was sown. That's the end of it.
Yeah, a lot of echoes was the Psalm 119.
I have always threatened, or when we were in the election review, I always told people I was going to read something like this if ever I had the pulpit in the synagogue. and talk about things and intimate, maybe, hint whom I was talking about, because we have all kinds of people like this there. But I was going to just read it out of the New Testament there without identifying it as such. And I would get a bunch of people say, hey, wow, that's really great stuff. Where did that come? Well, it came from the people down the street in their Bible. So I was going to do that. I never had the chutzpah to do that. But one day I'm going to get up and I'm going to quote some wonderful saying of Jesus that comes right out of there, a parable or a condemnation or a pointed thing of that. I said, wow, where'd you get that, Rabbi? What was the rabbi? I said, well, it was Rabbi Jesus. Said that there.
Yeah. You could even quote the
Should I do
Hebrew,
that or
the
not?
Hebrew New Testament. So, yeah.
Pardon?
You could even quote the Hebrew New Testament, make it even sound more from the Jewish tradition.
It sort of says the same thing in the beginning of Jeremiah, which we read last week in the synagogue. It says that I've come to I've come to tear down, to destroy, to uproot, to do that, and then to build and to plant.
Yeah.
In other words, you've got to do some preparation. You can't just go out and plant something. The seeds are very good. They might be very wonderful things, and that there's nothing wrong with them at all. They're who that. But if you haven't done some preparation, your good seeds are going to go for naught, or just be gobbled up by the birds and so you can have great ideas in your church or synagogue or wherever, but if you have not done the plowing and the culling out, and maybe you have to throw a few bullies out or something like that, and whatever you have to do to get it done, but if you haven't done that, the seeds are just not going to go anywhere. No matter how good they are, they might be the most top line seeds in that, but they're not going to do anything if you don't have the right conditions for them to grow and sprout them. Am I not correct about that?
But interesting, when you compare this story to farming today, this process that the sower is using is extremely inefficient. He's throwing seed everywhere. It's going in the field, it's going out of the field. I know, like in PEI, when they plant seeds, they actually have a thing that plants the seed in a very specific place where it's supposed to go. It's a vast, complicated machine that does it. And he's just
But it was done differently in other times. It's on the Nebraska state capitol, I believe. Nebraska is a great agricultural state. And there's a statue of a sower up there, a woman with a basket of seed, and she's sowing the seed out on the prairie soil. And it was just the way they did things. And I think other places in the world also, if you look at that then and see.
There's a lot to this text has to do with just the importance of listening and what listening is like. I mean, Jesus says, right, after he says the parable, those with ears, listen, right? And then he gets to, you therefore listen to the parable of the son. Anyone hearing the word of the kingdom and not understanding,
Oh, yeah.
There's this sense of so what's different about God's kingdom? Well, something that's different is that there's a lot of listening that goes on in God's kingdom, as opposed to earthly kingdoms. And I always think it's always good to say, Jesus and Matthew especially teaches, speaks a lot about the kingdom of God. So a kingdom of God, how is this different than the earthly kingdoms that exist? I mean, the kingdoms around us. I mean, politicians aren't necessarily the best listeners.
No.
And there's something, because if you're a listener, you're spending time. You're not necessarily the same decisive person, or willing to go down and just make certain decisions because you've got an agenda and you don't have time to listen because you're just trying to tick the boxes off what you have to get done. And there's something about God's kingdom that is different here in terms of the listening, and there's something to that in terms of our own self and our own relationship to God and being able to receive the kingdom of God, right?
But listening is not merely listening. You listen, and there's some kind of commandment that comes out of the listening. Isn't that correct?
There's a listening that there's an understanding, and I mean Jesus, like he says,
you don't just sit around and
casually listen. In fact, very few will get it.
But there's an arrow of some sort that comes out of the listening there. It's not just sitting around.
It's a focused,
thing, what we say.
it's a focused listening that leads to action. Isn't that why in Jewish tradition, in Jewish practice, you say the Shema twice a day, and you actually cover your eyes when you?
Well, yeah, that's why he talks about bearing fruit, right? I mean, there's something that happens as a result of this listening.
See, we
Right.
keep talking about the ethics of the fathers. My favorite saying there is "Emorama atva seharbe," say little and do a lot. And a corollary to that is don't say a lot, listen. Do more listening. I put that in with what we're getting here. Listen, do more listening than talking. And once you listen and get the idea, go out and do something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One of
Yeah,
the
well,
ironies
and to be careful here, because we might confuse doing. We might see doing as the primary or as the most important thing, and I don't think that's what Jesus is saying in this parable. But the doing is by the sower, in a sense. There's a different kind of doing, if we want to call doing and listening, as the doing is the listening, and that listening will bear fruit.
I'll take that.
But the most important thing here is the listening and not the doing.
Yeah.
Not
It is,
merely
exactly.
doing. No, that's
Yeah.
no good. I take that correct.
Because if you're not listening, then you're not going to be doing what,
right.
at least what God hopes you'll be doing.
You'll just do some random doing and that. And you want some
Yeah,
you
the
want
doing that I
informed-
need, the doing that I
informed
need to do.
doing. That's
To kind of
cultivated
paraphrase Paul from last week.
That's the irony with the Bible, the seed, which is the seed. People listen to it, but then a lot of Christians end up with a very narrow, limited focus of what they understand it to be, and that is not
And some really
listening.
bad theology in the process.
Exactly. Yeah. So listening should be broadening your viewpoints and possibilities rather than narrowing it.
It's really interesting at a corollary when you're talking about in the martial arts, you start with a white belt and you go through many, many different belts, orange, blue, green, brown, black, and then you go back to white, because the more you know, the more you don't know, and the more you need to keep learning. But the masters, you'll notice they have white belts like the starters.
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
Yeah.
Like that. It's good. Yeah. It's good.
Because and Jesus, he said, that the reward is one of joy, right? That listening it moves us to joy. There's almost a sense of fulfillment there, right?
Yes.
That comes with the listening, with the understanding.
Yeah. Because you get like
And he's very clear, that there's the lure of the wealth, of the cares of the world, right? There's a lot of doing associated with those things in our world, right? Or in the world, that might actually be different if we're listening.
Yeah.
A lot different.
That's why the Christians, sometimes more than the Jews, liked Martin Buber, I guess. Yes, I am thou. Things together there. There were all kinds of Christian citations that work there, and he is not always looked upon favorably in the Jewish community, oddly enough.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I thought it was interesting when I was reading that they talked about the word being the seed and the soil being a God-inspired reaction to and us being basically the soil. But it brought me back to what Judy was saying last week about discipline, and that it's the discipline that makes the soil good. Not just in doing, but in actually creating a code of conduct,
Right.
So are we the soil then?
Yeah, that's what I understood it to be, that the seed was the word and we were the soil.
Oh,
and
so
the soil was
so the soil has to be prepared. We have to be prepared.
Yeah.
I'll take that.
And discipline can do that, because the discipline of prayer or meditation can bring you to have a code, like this is who I am, and therefore this is how I will receive this word or this or how I will do this action because this is who I am from my discipline.
Yeah. The discipline is the plowing, yeah, and the work preparing.
Well, yeah, I mean, you think of those sort of like the old monastic rules, right? Like the rule is like those were put in place not just so people could learn how to live together, right? And also create a place where where listening could happen and where the soil was prepared.
Yeah.
And I think the soil, if you take us as the soil, it takes a lot of different types of soil to allow for the best growth, right? Like if every single piece of the soil was the same, it's not going to last very long, right? This plant needs more magnesium. This plant needs more phosphorus. This plant needs more calcium. This plant needs more, and it doesn't mean that it has to be this strict homogeneous
No, I agree. Yeah.
soil, right? Like it's made up of a whole diverse, and that's what gives it its strength, right?
Yeah.
If you keep pruning the tree and pruning the roots so that it's always exactly the same, that tree is going to die,
Right.
because it can't expand, it can't grow, right? It can't reach down, it can't reach out.
And there's definitely a promise of growth in this passage, right? That the kingdom is about growth and expand. Growth isn't the expansion, maybe. I kind of think of the line of you get that expanding foam that you use in home renos, and it just keeps going and going and going, right? And it's that kind of thing with the kingdom of God. Is that once it that seed finds a home, it's amazing how many people can be included. We can include in our circle of life, or what is not just people, but what is included in our circle of life.
Right.
Whereas it become very limited otherwise. People who are pursuing wealth or whatever, right? Where well, you don't matter because you don't fit my, you don't matter in my kingdom, like in my earthly kingdom. But if I'm actually seeking to live with a foot, maybe both feet in God's kingdom, that's going to be a little bit different, right? In terms of what my worldview is.
Yeah.
It's back to Isaiah 54, enlarge your tent, drive your pigs firm, right?
Right.
Yes. But it's not necessarily how big the tree is, it's how healthy it is as well. Yeah.
But I think that God will take care of that.
Yeah. Grows where it's supposed to. Yeah. Good. Okay, it's 11:05. Okay to stop for today. Great. Yeah.
Thanks, everybody. Really great, wonderful insights today.
Yes. Very good.
Thanks to all. Good talk.
Stay cool, everyone.
Yeah.
Blessings
Have a
on
good
your
week.
day. Yeah.
Stay